Let me tell you about a strange thing that happened to a man named Victor. It's the kind of story that, at first, you might dismiss. You'd assume there has to be a logical explanation, some kind of misunderstanding or mistake. But the more details you hear, the harder it becomes to explain away. Victor was traveling for work. He'd had a long flight, a delayed connection, and by the time he finally arrived in the city, it was nearly midnight. He checked into an old downtown hotel, the kind of place that still looked elegant, but felt a little forgotten by time. The lobby had these grand marble floors and dim chandeliers, and it was filled with that quiet echo you only find in places that used to be busy. But are you in anymore? The receptionist looked exhausted, but was polite enough. She handed Victor his key card and told him his room was on the 10th floor. Victor grabbed a suitcase and headed for the elevator. Now, this is where the first strange detail comes in. When he stepped inside the elevator, he noticed something unusual about the floor buttons. They went from 8 directly to 10. There was no 9th floor. Victor thought it was a bit odd, but not impossible. Some hotels skip the number 13 because of superstition. Maybe this old building had its own strange quirk. So, he pressed 10. The elevator doors slid shut. The ride-up was quiet, but about halfway there, Victor felt something strange. The elevator stopped. It wasn't a loud jolt or a sudden drop, just a gentle, silent pause. He glanced at the control panel, and the digital display showed something that shouldn't have been possible. Floor 9, but there was no button for a 9th floor. Before Victor could even process what was happening, the elevator doors slowly began to open. Outside was a hallway. The lights were dim, the wallpaper was old and peeling, and a long corridor stretched into darkness. Victor cautiously stepped forward, completely confused. This floor looked much older than the rest of the hotel. The carpet was faded and worn, and the lights flickered softly, as if they hadn't been replaced in decades. But the strangest part was the silence. It wasn't the normal quiet you'd expect in a hotel hallway at night. This silence felt heavy. It was like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Victor leaned out of the elevator and peered down the corridor. He could see room numbers on the doors. 901, 902, 903. The numbers continued down the hall, exactly like a normal floor, but that made absolutely no sense. According to the elevator panel, this floor didn't exist. For a brief moment, Victor considered stepping out to explore. He was curious, but then something happened that stopped him cold. At the very end of the hallway, one of the room doors began to open. It moved slowly, just a few inches, creating a dark slit in the wall. Victor froze. No one stepped out. No sound came from inside the room. There was just that narrow, dark opening, as if someone was standing right behind it, watching him. Then, a voice echoed down the silent hallway. It was soft, calm, almost a whisper. Finally, someone arrived. A wave of pure panic washed over Victor. He frantically jabbed the door close button. The elevator doors shut, and with a soft chime, the elevator started moving again. When it finally reached the 10th floor, everything was perfectly normal. The lights were bright, the carpet was modern and clean, and he could hear the faint murmur of people talking down the hall. Victor tried to convince himself it was just a maintenance floor. Maybe the elevator had malfunctioned. Maybe he'd imagined the voice. He tried to rationalize it all away, but that night, as Victor lay in his bed, struggling to fall asleep, he heard a sound that made his heart start pounding in his chest. It was the faint, distant sound of an elevator stopping. And somewhere on the floor just below him, he heard a door slowly creaking open. Victor didn't sleep much that night. At first, he tried to just ignore the sound. I mean, hotels are always full of strange noises, right? You've got elevators moving, pipes humming, footsteps in the hallway. It's just part of the experience, but this sound, this one felt different. It was precise. It came at exactly the same time, every single night. 11:58. p.m. Victor first noticed it on his second night at the hotel. The elevator would suddenly stop. A faint, distant ding would echo through the otherwise quiet hallway. Then, a door somewhere on the floor below us would slowly painfully creak open. And after that, complete, unnerving silence. It was a kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. The next morning, Victor tried asking the front desk about it. He tried to be casual, not wanting to sound like he was crazy. He mentioned the elevator stopping between floors. Maybe a mechanical issue. The receptionist, a young woman with a polite but distant smile, immediately looked confused. "Between floors?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Victor explained. He told her about being on the 10th floor, the elevator stopping, what he assumed was the 9th floor, the hallway sounds, the doors, even a faint voice he thought he might have heard. The receptionist stared at him for a long, uncomfortably moment, then forced a smile back onto her face. "Sir," she said, her voice a little too cheerful, "this hotel doesn't have a 9th floor." Victor gave an awkward laugh. "Yeah, I know the button skips from 8 to 10. A superstition thing, right? But the elevator definitely stopped there." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "The elevator can stop on a floor that doesn't exist," she said flatly. The conversation was clearly over. Victor didn't push it. He went about his day, trying to forget the whole weird exchange. But as the evening wore on, that nagging curiosity, that little voice in the back of his mind, just wouldn't shut up. Tu? No. So, that night at 11:57 p.m., Victor found himself standing in front of the elevator doors, his heart pounding a little faster than usual. He stepped inside. He pressed the button for floor 10. Just like the nights before, the elevator began its smooth, familiar ascent. 6, 7, 8, and then, at exactly 11:58 p.m., the elevator shuddered to a stop. The digital display above the door, which should have been blank or shown 10, flickered and then settled on a single, "Impossible in 9." Victor felt his stomach tighten into a cold knot. The doors slowly, deliberately, slid open. It was the same hallway he'd glimpsed before. The same dim, flickering lights. The same faded, patterned carpet that had seen better decades. But, something was profoundly different. There were lights on inside the rooms, casting soft yellow glows from under the doors. He could see shadows moving behind the thin curtains, the silhouettes of people inside. And then he saw him. Someone was walking slowly down the hallway, their back to the elevator. Before he could second-guess himself, before his brain could scream at him to stay put, Victor stepped out of the elevator. The doors slid shut behind him with a soft thud, sealing his decision. The air on this floor felt colder, heavier. Every step he took on the worn carpet seemed to echo loudly in the suffocating quiet. He started walking towards the figure, and then he noticed the man standing about halfway down the corridor, now stopped, as if waiting. The man looked perfectly normal at first glance. A dark suit, a tie, a briefcase held in one hand. Just a businessman, maybe. But as Victor got closer, the man turned around, and Victor's blood ran cold. His breath caught in his throat. The man looked exactly like him. Tasame faced the same height, even the same bewildered, confused expression that Victor knew was plastered all over his own face right now. The stranger, his doppelganger, tilted his head just slightly, a gesture that was unnervingly familiar. Tene spoke, and his voice, which was Victor's own voice, said something that shattered Victor's reality into a million pieces. "You shouldn't be here yet." Victor stood frozen in the hallway, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. He was looking at a man who looked exactly, uncannily, like him. The same dark hair, the same slight scar above the left eyebrow, the same tired look in his eyes. For what felt like an eternity, though was probably only a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with a silence that felt heavier than anything Victor had ever known. Then, the stranger let out a long, weary sigh. The kind of sigh from someone who had been waiting for a very long time. "You took the elevator again," the man said, his voice calm, almost resigned. It was Victor's voice, but deeper, raspier. Victor finally managed to find his own voice, a dry whisper escaping his lips. Who are you?" The man's mouth curved into a faint, sad smile. "You." Just later, a cold wave of disbelief crashed over Victor. This had to be a dream, a bizarre, stress-induced nightmare. But the worn carpet under his shoes, the faint smell of old paper and dust, the flickering fluorescent light overhead, it all felt too real. The stranger, his future self, began to walk slowly toward him, his footsteps echoing softly in the long corridor. "You're wondering what this place is," he said, more a statement than a question. Victor could only manage a slow, numb nod. His mind was racing, trying to catch up, but it felt like running through mud. The man gestured vaguely down the hallway, past the endless line of identical, unmarked doors. "This floor, it doesn't belong to the hotel," he explained. "It belongs to time." Victor stared at him, utterly lost. What does that even mean? His future self continued, his tone patient, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept. "Every once in a while, someone stumbles onto this floor by accident. Usually, it's through that elevator you just took. Most people feel the wrongness of it all and leave immediately. They press the button and go right back to their lives without a second thought." He paused, his gaze locking onto Victor's. "But some people stay." An icy dread started to creep up Victor's spine. What happens to them? The man's expression grew serious, the faint smile vanishing completely. They stopped leaving. Victor felt his chest tighten, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't a dream. This was a trap. His older self pointed a finger toward the rooms lining the hallway. Each of these doors, each one shows a different version of your life, a different path you could have taken. He gestured to the first door. "In there is the life where you accepted that job offer in another country, the one you agonized over 4 weeks." He pointed to another one further down. "That one? That's where you never broke up with your college sweetheart. You have a family, a dog, a house in the suburbs." He kept walking, pointing. "One where you stayed somewhere a little longer, one where you left a little sooner, one where you never left at all." The horrifying truth began to dawn on Victor, piece by painful piece. This floor, it shows alternate lives. The stranger nodded slowly. "A library of possibilities. You can look, you can see what might have been." He took another step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But there's a catch. The longer you stay here, looking through these doors, the more this place gets its hooks into you. The possibilities start to feel more real than your own life, and it becomes harder and harder to go back to the one you left behind." Panic seized Victor. Espun around his eyes, desperately searching for the elevator. The golden doors were still open, a beacon of escape in the dim, oppressive hallway. But as he looked, the corridor behind him seemed to stretch, the distance to the elevator suddenly looking longer, the shadows in the corners deepening, twisting into menacing shapes. And then Victor saw it, something that made his blood run cold. Very, very slowly, with a soft, final hum, the elevator doors were starting to close. Victor sprinted towards the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the unnervingly silent hallway. He lunged for the call button, but it was too late. With a soft chime, the polished brass doors slid shut, sealing his fate. The floor indicator blinked once. 10 went dark. The elevator was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. He was alone on the 9th floor, or so he thought. From the shadows near a service closet, a figure emerged. The man looked eerily familiar, a distorted reflection of Victor himself, but older, wearier. His eyes held a chilling stillness. "You stayed too long," the man said, his voice a dry rasp, like sandpaper on stone. A cold wave of panic washed over Victor. His heart hammered against his ribs. What's going on? How do I get out of here? The man's gaze was unwavering, his expression unreadable. He simply lifted a hand and pointed down the long, dimly lit corridor behind them. "There's another elevator," he explained calmly, "but it has a rule. Only one person can use it." Victor started trying to process the words, the sheer absurdity of the situation. "What do you mean, only one person?" Estam merit. A flicker of something, was it pity? Regret? Crossed the stranger's face before it was gone. He finally revealed the horrifying truth, the words hanging heavy in the stagnant air. I've been here for 12 years. Victor's breath hitched. His blood ran cold. 12 years. I came to this floor the exact same way you did, the man continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, chasing a moment, a memory. But this place, it has its own economy. It keeps one, and waits for another. Every time someone new arrives, one person gets to leave. The terrible realization dawned on Victor, a slow, creeping dread that coiled in his gut. He was the replacement. The newcomer. So, Victor said, his voice barely audible. Either you go, or Ido. The man nodded slowly. A silent confirmation that sealed the nightmare. As if on cue, the fluorescent lights in the hallway ceiling began to flicker erratically, casting, dancing, distorted shadows along the walls. From the far end of the corridor, a faint sound cut through the silence. A single, sharp asterisk. Ding asterisk. Victor's eyes shot towards the sound. Dante Hall. A set of old, unmarked elevator doors slid open, spilling a weak, pale light into the gloom. It was an invitation, an ultimatum. The stranger looked at Victor, a final, searching gaze that seemed to peel back every layer of his soul. You have 5 minutes to decide, he said. Victor's gaze drifted from the open elevator back to the man who wore his face. 2 lives, 2 versions of himself, separated by a decade of imprisonment, only one exile, a single chance. A freedom, and somewhere far above them, beyond the confines of this impossible floor, the Grand Hotel clock began its slow, deliberatissime, striking the hour of midnight. So, a word of advice. If you ever find yourself staying in an old Grand Hotel, and you happen to notice the elevator seems to skip a floor in its ascent, don't be curious. Don't try to find the staircase. Don't try to find out why, because sometimes the floors that don't exist are the ones people never come back from. And if you enjoy mysterious suspense stories that send a shiver down your spine, and you want to hear more strange tales, just like this one, make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey into the unknown. Thanks for listening.